There's a test you can run on any scene in your manuscript that will tell you in about 30 seconds whether you're underwriting it or whether it's actually fine as is. And almost no one's teaching it. If you constantly finish a scene, read it, and then think something's missing, but I don't know what, you're not bad at description, you're skipping a specific detail, and once I tell you what it is, you'll see it everywhere in your draft. Probably. One of the lovely trilogy members on my channel, eMassey asked how to add more to a bare bones draft. How to know when you're underwriting versus when your minimal prose is actually doing its job. And I love this question because almost every piece of advice out there on this topic is some version of add more sensory details and internal monologue, which, even though I have videos on that, doesn't always solve the problem. Sometimes it's like telling an insomniac to just sleep better. So we're not doing that today. Today, we're diagnosing what your draft might be missing in specific fixable categories. If you're new here, my name is Brianna and I post videos every Sunday that help you become a better writer. So if you're interested, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Now, before we get into it, let's talk about underwriting. So if you tend to write lean, so short scenes, dialogue heavy, drafts that usually come in under genre word counts, you're what the community calls an underwriter. About half of all writers are, and the other half are overwriters who have to cut. And frankly, I think they have the harder problem because writing fresh is, to me, much easier than killing your darlings. So the first step is if you typically write short drafts, stop treating that like a character defect when it's actually just a revision style. Where overwriters revise by subtraction, you revise by addition. Different process, but same destination. The actual problem isn't that your draft is short, it's that when underwriters are told to add more to their draft, they tend to add the wrong things. They pad the manuscript by sprinkling in adjectives or tacking on paragraphs describing the curtains. And then they reread it and it still feels flat because curtains weren't the problem. For example, the most common type of underwritten scene is the placeholder scene. The one where your character walks from point A to point B, they have a conversation that conveys the plot information that they need to convey, and then they exit. Nothing else happens. No interiority, no environmental texture, nor subtext. It's just the bare minimum movement of the plot machinery, which, to be fair, is exactly what a first draft is supposed to be in some places. But the problem is when you have too many placeholder scenes in your manuscript. That's when the whole thing starts to feel skeletal. So when you feel like your draft is missing something, it's likely that too many of your scenes are still placeholders, and they need to become actual scenes. So how does that happen? Your first draft is probably missing one or more of 5 specific things. We're gonna go through each one, what it looks like, why it matters, and how to add it without bloating your manuscript into a 500,000 word book. The first thing is the layer that only prose can do, and that's interiority. If you only take one thing away from this video, it's this. Also, I apologize in advance if you can hear my baby crying. Interiority is your point of view character's inner world. Their thoughts, reactions, half-formed opinions, the gap between what they say and what they actually mean, the memory that flickers when someone says a specific word, the why behind a feeling. It's the single thing that prose can do that film and screenplay simply can't or struggle to do and accomplish. And it's the detail that barebones writers skip more than any other. Because dialogue and action feel like the story, and interiority feels like the stuff happening between the story. But it's not. It is the story. So let's take a look at a weak example. Rook walked into the room. The king sat on the dais. "You sent me. You sent for me," Rook said. The king nodded. That's technically a scene, but it's also more like a screenplay. There's nothing wrong with the words individually. The problem is that we're watching this from a security camera mounted on the wall. We're not inside Rook. So a stronger example could say, the cold hit Rook first as he stepped into the room. Not the temperature, but the smell. That flat mineral chill of stone that had never known a fire. The king sat on the dais as usual, the same way he'd sat laughing with Rook's father 20 years ago, before any of this. "You sent for me," Rook said, hating how quick and eager the words came out, like he was still 9 years old, waiting to be told he'd done well. So here we have the same beat and plot information, but now we know Rook. We gain some understanding of his history with his place, his complicated relationship with the king, the boy that still lives inside the adult. None of that required new plot, it just required interiority. So how do you add interiority to your own work? Go scene by scene and ask yourself, what is my point of view character thinking during this exchange that they're not saying? What memory does this moment touch? What are they choosing to hide, even maybe from themselves? Then put one or two of those things on the page. Not all of them, just the most charged one. That said, interiority can be overdone. If every line of dialogue is followed by a 3-paragraph internal reflection, your pacing dies. You want to use interiority at emotional pressure points, such as moments of decision, recognition, or conflict, and let the action carry the connective tissue. The second detail your scenes might be missing is sensory detail. Now, I know engage all 5 senses is one of the most beat to death piece of writing advice on the internet, but there's a reason it keeps getting repeated. And that's because most barebones writers describe what they see and nothing else. Their scenes are silent, scentless, and texture-free. The reason this matters is neurological. Smell, taste, and tactile sensation are the senses most directly wired into memory and emotion in the human brain. When you put a smell on the page, wood smoke, blood, your grandmother's perfume, wet wool, your reader's brain doesn't process it as description, it processes it as experience. That's the difference between a reader watching a scene versus a reader being inside it. So a weak example might say, Sable entered the tavern. It was crowded and loud. Whereas a stronger example might say, Sable entered the tavern. The wall of warm air hit her first, laced with bodies, beer, and the sticky sweet smell of pipe smoke clinging to 100-year-old wood. A group of men near the hearth burst into raucous laughter. The floor under her boots was tacky, and she didn't want to think about what with. So if you noticed, I didn't add extra paragraphs. I added a few extra words per sense to expand that barebones line. That's all it takes. So to add this in your own work, pick the 3 or 4 scenes in your manuscript that should feel the most immersive. So the inciting incident, the midpoint, the climax, an emotional turning point, scenes like that. And then see how you can incorporate maybe 1 or 2, maybe even 3 extra senses within that scene. But not all 5 senses at the same time or every time. Now don't just pick the sense that's the most evocative for the location. Pick the one that mirrors or contrasts with your point of view character's emotional state in that moment. Maybe a grieving character notices her mother's perfume on a stranger, or a character on the edge of rage notices the heat of the radiator pressing into his back. That sticky sensory detail anchors you to the moment and does a lot more emotional work than a whole paragraph of generic atmosphere that the reader's eye is just going to skim over anyways. That said, sparse settings can be intentional. Maybe it's a liminal space or a dream sequence or a moment of dissociation. Sometimes you want the reader to feel that visual-only flatness because the character does. Sparseness can be a narrative tool, just make sure you're using it on purpose. The third detail you might be missing is microaction and body language. This is also an easy one for underwriters to skip because it feels like fluff, when in reality it's the opposite. It's the connective tissue that makes dialogue feel like 2 people in a room instead of 2 voices in a void. Microaction is what your characters' bodies are doing while they're talking. Small specific things like the thumb that finds the edge of a teacup, the pause before an answer, the shifting of weight, or the looking away that tells more than words do. So a weak example of this could say, I don't love him anymore, she said. I think I'm leaving. That sentence is doing 0 work to show us the emotional reality of what's happening. Is she calm? Is she furious? Is she lying? We have no idea. Now, you can just add a simple adjective like, I don't love him anymore, she said uncertainly. I think I'm leaving. You can do that. But the emotional impact is weak because we're being told of the uncertainty. We don't make that connection ourselves, therefore we don't feel it alongside her. So a stronger example could say, I don't love him anymore. She turned the ring on her finger, turned it again. I think I'm leaving. Now we have a character and subtext, which I'll get to just now. The ring suggests that this is hard, that some part of her is still attached and she's possibly trying to convince herself of her words. All we did was add a gesture, but that puts in more work than just an adjective. This is essentially what we mean when we say show, don't tell. So when you revise a dialogue scene, ask yourself, what is the most charged object in this room? So the object that would have the most emotional relevance to what's happening in this moment, and which character would touch it. Because body language is most powerful when it touches something, because that thing now carries meaning. Either some piece of jewelry or a keepsake, maybe even a weapon. Objects make great carriers for symbolism. Now, once you've nailed the microaction, you can take it a step further by letting the environment act on the character. So body language is your character doing something with their body, and environment as a ticking clock is the world doing something to your character and forcing them to react mid-conversation. The bread is burning while they argue. The rain starts. The fire is dying down and someone has to get up and add a log. The candle is shrinking and darkness is settling deeper. The horses are getting restless. The tide is coming in. Now the environment isn't passive scenery sitting in the background. It's another character in the scene, putting pressure on the dialogue and giving your character something to physically respond to between lines. This is one of the lowest effort ways to add tension and texture to a scene that's otherwise just voices in a void. The fourth detail you might be missing is subtext, and this connects with my previous point about body language and microactions. Words have two layers, the text and the subtext. Text is what you're reading on the surface level, and subtext is the meaning underneath the words. It's the reason a scene where nothing seems to happen can feel devastating. This is what we mean when we say to read between the lines. Now, most barebones writers don't skip subtext on purpose. They skip it because they usually think subtext is something that just happens in your writing. In reality, it's something you add through specificity. So a weak example would say, Celine looked at Talon. We need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to talk about, he said. There is. Drop it. That's a scene where they're arguing about whether to have an argument. The reader has nothing to do. There's no layer to read into. So a stronger example of this moment could say, Celine looked at Talon, who was very deliberately rearranging the books on the shelf they'd built together. We need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to talk about, he said. A book went in with the spine facing the back of the shelf, which she'd always hated when he did it. There is. Drop it. The next book also spine in. Now the scene is about the books, which is to say it's about the home they made and the fact that he is unmaking it one small thing at a time while pretending nothing is wrong. The dialogue didn't change, the world around the dialogue changed. So after you've drafted a scene, ask yourself, what is this scene really about? Underneath the surface conflict. Then find one concrete object, action, or detail that quietly carries that meaning and add it in. But just one, because the whole point of subtext is that it's restrained. Now, it's important to note that subtext only works if the surface level narration is also working. Don't try to make a confusing scene mean more by hiding the meaning further. Subtext is meant to be the cherry on top, not structural. The fifth and last detail you might be missing is context, stakes, and the reader's map. And I'm bunching these three together because they're less about scene level depth and more about the macro problem writers tend to run into, which is that you know your story so well, but you forget that your reader doesn't. You wrote the world building in your notes. You wrote the character's backstory in your head. You wrote the magic system rules on a napkin 3 years ago. And then you skipped over them in the draft because to you, they were obvious. But they're not obvious. The reader is reading blind, and when they hit a scene where the stakes feel weirdly low or the emotional payoff doesn't land, it's very often because the context that makes it matter was left in your brain instead of pulled out onto the page. So a weak example would say, Marin reached for the relic, her hand shook. A stronger example would say, Marin reached for the relic, her sister was the last person to touch it, and she hadn't lasted the night. Her hand shook. So one sentence of context, but now the trembling hand means something. Now the reader is afraid for her. So what you want to do is read your draft pretending that you know nothing. And if you can't do that, take a step back from your draft for a decent period of time, like a month. Just enough time where you forget those little details. And then come back to it. And then at every emotionally charged moment, ask yourself, do I, the reader, know enough to feel what I'm supposed to feel here? If the answer is no, then you don't need a flashback or a paragraph of exposition. What you need is just one sentence of context placed right before the emotional beat so that it lands without bloating your word count. Now, this is not permission to info dump. If you find yourself writing 3 paragraphs of backstory, then you're using context wrong. Context works in small, precisely placed doses. Ideally, the reader will find out the larger details of the context naturally later on in the story, or will already know it depending on where the scene is in the story. Okay, we've covered what's missing. Now, how do you know what's fluff and what's essential? Every detail in your manuscript should pass at least one of these 3 tests. Does it advance the plot or reveal something about a character? Does it carry subtext or emotional charge? Or does it ground the reader in the world in a way no other detail in the scene is doing? If it does at least one of those things, keep it. If it does 2 or 3, then you've written a great sentence. But if it does none of those things, then it's most likely fluff and you can cut it. or reword it. The principle for this test is functional density. This is the idea that every sentence in your manuscript should be doing more than one job. World building and characterization, plot and subtext, sensory grounding and emotional payoff. The denser the function per sentence, the richer the scene. And the leaner and more intentional your draft starts to feel, even when what you're doing is adding to it. This is also how you can avoid overcorrecting when you revise. You're not just adding stuff, you're adding stuff that passes these tests. Those curtains I mentioned at the start of the video pass the test if the curtains are mentioned in chapter 20 when she finally takes them down because she's leaving. Curtains don't pass the test if they're just there for visual filler. So, back to the question I asked at the very beginning. When you finish a scene and reread it and something feels missing, what's actually missing? Now you know. It's interiority, or non-visual sensory grounding, or a specific microaction, or subtext, or context. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's all five, but it's almost never more adjectives. The reason your draft feels bare bones isn't that you're a bad writer. It's that you've been writing the parts of a story a camera can capture and skipping the parts that only prose can do. The solution is more layers, not words. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, you might want to watch this one next. And tell me, what's the scene in your current manuscript that you know needs more depth, but you can't figure out what's missing? Until the next chapter.